Hi everyone. Welcome to the webinar that we are conducting this evening about the Master of Children's Literature and Master of Creative Writing programs at Macquarie. We're going to introduce ourselves to you in a second, but we decided that we would kind of make this an informal discussion about the two programs. If you're interested in some more factual information, we actually both of us recorded webinars separately last year, and they are available on Macquarie's YouTube channel. So if you are watching this, you will have the details, a link to those webinars emailed to you afterwards. Okay.
Thank you, Victoria. So we thought we'd introduce ourselves. We are the program directors. I'm the program director of the Masters in Creative Writing and the Graduate Diploma in Creative Writing. Victoria is the program director of the Children's Literature Masters and the Children's Literature Graduate Diploma. And these are the two programs we're going to be talking about today. So, but first, just a little bit more about who we are and who the teachers are in the programs. So I'm just going to say a few words about...
We're going to introduce each other.
Yeah,
we thought that would be more fun because we're too modest to talk about ourselves.
So Victoria, she's the author of 2 books of children's literary criticism. Excuse me, got a bit of a cough here. Into the Closet, Cross-Dressing and the Gendered Body in Children's Literature and Film, and Technology and Identity in Young Adult Fiction, The Posthuman Subject. And this book recently received a very positive review from the British Society for Literature and Science, in which Catherine Ford from the Science Museum, London, described the book as a convincingly written, well-argued and fascinating exploration of the use of the posthuman in YA fiction. And Victoria is also currently in the process of writing her 3rd book, which examines the impact of social media on gender and sexual identity in YA fiction. And so what you see in Victoria is a really engaged researcher who's sort of working at real cutting edge of ideas about children's literature and YA fiction in particular, and also teaching and incorporating the kind of ideas that she's exploring in her writing into her teaching. So it makes for very dynamic classrooms. And Victoria's also provided consulting services to multinational toy manufacturer Mattel, where she's been talking to them about the importance of fantasy play for children, and being a spokesperson at key times such as Christmas, when it's really important that parents think wisely and in a kind of relaxed way about what they're going to be buying for their children. An article that she contributed to The Conversation, which is an online sort of platform where academics and others discuss important issues in really interesting ways in non-academic terms. I suggest you check it out sometime, theconversation.au. So she's contributed to The Conversation on the benefits of fantasy literature for children. And in fact, this article that she wrote has been translated into a range of languages, including French and Portuguese. It's had huge impact, and was the impetus for a panel discussion of children's fantasy writers at the Sydney Writers' Festival last year. And Victoria was also talking and hosting a panel at the Sydney Writers' Festival just last week, or the week before this year, in fact.
I was.
So that is Victoria.
Thank you. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you Associate Professor Jane Messer. Jane has been teaching writing for over 20 years, and she's published novels and anthologies by really well-regarded publishers such as Picador, Vintage and McPhee Gribble, and also in anthologies and journals such as the Griffith Review, Going Down Swinging and Westerly. And she's also had radio dramas broadcast on Radio National and received nominations for international radio prizes. So Jane is a creative writer who writes for a number of different genres. Her most recent novel, Hopscotch, I love the cover of Hopscotch.
Thank you.
Was reviewed in the Sydney Morning Herald. Actually, I think it was reviewed twice, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
2 different reviewers.
Yeah.
Wasn't a reprint accidentally.
And I'm going to read out a little bit from one of those reviews because it will give you an indication as to the quality of Jane's writing. One reviewer wrote that Jane is a versatile author whose works include short stories and radio plays. Her skill with short forms is worth noting. There's nothing flabby or sentimental about Hopscotch. Every section of dialogue and narrative, every character is sculpted in clean lines. And Johnston compliments Jane for tackling what most Australian writers steer well away from, any commentary on our economic lives. There is, she wrote, a paucity of novels dealing with recent political and economic upheavals. And in conjunction with her creative writing work, Jane also does interdisciplinary academic research, and this research focuses on the ways in which we narrate our work lives and the impact of working on identity. And she's got a particular interest in the way that mothers work and in the way in which mothering involves complex forms of emotional labour. Jane is also a former judge of the Australian Vogel Literary Award and a former board member of the Australian Society of Authors. And she's also been awarded 3 citations for her teaching excellence. So this is an extremely, extremely impressive person that I have sitting next to me.
But I guess the reason we're telling you about ourselves is to say that the quality of the teachers in our programs, not just us, but the others that we work with, is very high. We're all, working, publishing, writing constantly, and it makes for a dynamic and engaged environment amongst the students and with us.
Yes, I agree. So maybe the next thing we could move on to is we thought that we might give you just a very kind of brief introduction about our postgraduate programs. Did you want to start, Jane? Or
yeah, so as Victoria said earlier at the start, we do have lots of factual information in the webinars that we recorded last year, which also have PowerPoints with them. So there's written information and links to online information. So we're just going to kind of respond to some questions that people tend to ask that are harder to kind of document on the page. So some of the things that we do get regularly asked about is, for instance, what is the tone of the program? What's the feeling like? What are the class sizes like? So we offer basically blended programs. You can study completely online or have a classroom, whichever way you do it, whether you're on campus or online. The class sizes are small, so we have a real sense of community amongst the students. And even though most of our students are part-time, and so they might be doing one unit one time, then changing, people are not going through together necessarily. Even still, students get to know each other, and there is a great sense of, I think, camaraderie amongst many of them in both modes, online and campus. Do you want to talk about the weekly workload? Because that takes a bit of planning when you're going into postgraduate study. It can be a bit of a shock to the system.
It does. So for most of the units that I offer in the Master of Children's Literature program, you're looking at 12 or 13 weeks of coursework, and each of those weeks would typically involve one novel and then 2 or 3 critical readings. So it's a fairly hefty reading load, particularly if you think about subjects like young adult fiction, where the novels are thick. So that's just to give you an idea. Often when people ask me about what kind of load they should be taking on, the advice that I give people a lot of the time is that if you're studying part-time, is to try one subject per semester. Mm-hmm. And then what happens is if you do one subject per semester and you find that that's manageable, then the next semester you can take more. But having said that, I think sometimes people do get a shock about the amount of reading that's required. And if you're studying online, you need to not only to read those novels, to read the critical readings, but you need to make online posts and join in the discussion. So it means you also have to read all of the discussion posts.
Yeah,
and it's a fair time commitment.
It is. I mean, yeah, I think to be realistic, it's a definite time commitment, which a lot of the students want to do. They get excited by the work and they're really happy to do it. But it does take some planning to make sure you've got that time in your week. For the creative writing program students, a typical classroom or online experience, again, we have the 12 or 13 week session, and each week students will be doing 3 key things. They will be doing their own writing. This might be completely independently, or it might also involve a writing exercise that I've given or another one of the teachers has given. They'll be workshopping each other's writing, so they'll be either in the class or online reading one another's work. That is the scheduled workshops, so you always know well ahead of time when you're going to be workshopping. So you're receiving feedback, giving feedback, and we also have readings of key texts that I think are important, or that are either very contemporary and kind of showing us where we're headed with new literature, or sort of seminal texts that are useful to read. The reading is a lighter load than in the children's literature units because, of course, you need time to do your own writing. But the overall workload is, again, about 12 hours per week, which is what the university recommends you kind of calculate as a standard amount of work during semester. So that's not 12 hours a week, 52 weeks of the year, that is across the...
we do have holidays.
Yeah, students have holidays. So, yeah, you just need to kind of carve out a significant amount of time, which people do because they enjoy the learning so much. So what else? We're going to be talking about the Capstone unit. Yeah.
What's a Capstone unit, Jane?
Oh, so a Capstone unit, Capstone's a really popular concept now in tertiary education. So the idea with a Capstone is it's a unit of study which kind of pulls together some of the key topics and skills and knowledges that the student's been working on during their program of study. And so what we do in our Capstone, we share the Capstone. We have one Capstone for the 2 master's programs because many of our students have done units in both programs. And what we do in it is allow the student to, in a sense, design their own major work to quite an extent, but within 3 major modules.
Can I interrupt you quickly here?
Yes.
I mean, I just wanted to add too that one of the aims of a Capstone is to show students how the skills that they've acquired over their program of study can then be developed into professional skills for the workplace.
Yes.
So you might be thinking, what does a Master of Creative Writing or a Master of Children's Literature qualify me for? And part of the function of the Capstone is to demonstrate or identify to students the different kinds of career paths and skills that they've acquired over the course of their program. So hence, we have within our Capstone, which is sort of like a self-directed unit. There's a lot of self-independent learning, and essentially we're asking students to do a major work, and because they do the Capstone at the end of their degree, it's something that they work on independently with direction from us.
And we have you still have it's an online unit. You meet the other students online. It's called Literature and Writing in Professional Contexts. So, I mean, the 3, just to give a sort of example, so we've got 3 streams in this unit that you can do your major work within. So we have the journal article. So for people who want to go towards a PhD pathway, they have an opportunity to write a journal article for a peer-reviewed journal. Mm-hmm. Then we have the professional context module where children's literature and creative writing students have designed a major project, such as Sarah this year, who had written a musical theatre production, has done a series of podcasts about musical theatre and how to write for musical theatre. So that was
super interesting.
Yeah.
And one of my students, who is a teacher, her professional context project was that she asked the students in her school to create a newsletter. And what she did then was she then, for her project, then reflected on the kind of the steps of that process, the different pieces of writing that they'd included and why and things like that.
And we have quite a few teachers in both programs, and so the third major module area in the Capstone is curriculum design. So that might be designing a curriculum within a secondary or primary school environment. We had a really beautiful example of a curriculum for students moving from from primary to secondary who had difficulty with reading. And so this was a curriculum to really empower them and make them feel confident about starting high school and about their reading skills. And that Lisa from last year, I think, has gone on to a PhD. Another example was a creative writing in the community curriculum, so that in the kind of community learning environment. So being able to teach creative writing in an 8-week program to the general community. That was also a really nice
and the idea
package
behind the curriculum design is that students draw on knowledge that they've acquired throughout their postgraduate program and use that knowledge to design an educational curriculum.
So there's a lot of support for what are called employability or graduate outcomes throughout the program, and certainly the Capstone unit tries to pull that all together. Should we talk a little bit more about the blended curriculum? What is a blended curriculum, Victoria?
I think we should. Well, I think one of the really great positive features of our two programs is the way in which the student cohorts get to interact with each other. So they get to interact with each other in the Capstone unit. It's the last unit that students from Master of Children's Literature and Master of Creative Writing do. So they get to talk to each other there about their learning experiences. But also within both of our programs is an option for students to take electives from the other program. So for instance, actually it's not an option for your students, is it?
Yes.
Compulsory. Oh.
I don't know. It is no. Well, we have the core required units, which are from the children's literature students do primarily in their core the children's literature units, and then you have a spread of electives. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
And then I mean certainly in creative writing you could do all the creative writing core units, and then do quite a few children's literature units as your electives or not, depending on your interests.
So it's not compulsory or forced, but it's an option there for students. And actually, it's taken up by lots of them.
Yeah. Which is why we're able to get the Capstone unit, and in fact all those units working well together. Some students, want to just focus on children's literature, others just on creative writing, and others want to move back and forth and just experiment a little bit and see. In fact, quite a few students who are completely uninterested in children's literature, when they do a few weeks of it just in one of my early units, go, oh my God, actually I love YA literature. I had no idea that I did, or off they go.
And then I have my students wanting to do your units because they want to learn how to write fantasy.
Yes, or not.
There's
just
quite
fantasy.
a
lot of young adults. I mean, we have a lot. One of the things that is really unique to our program within Australia is the fact that we do have this combination of creative writing and children's literature with a specialisation in young adult fiction, and that we always have a solid core of people. Well, I certainly do, who have come for that reason, and it works quite well because then they can. Excuse me, we just lost our screen there. Our computer went to sleep, because what I do. When I know what people are interested in the classroom or online, I'm able to group those people together. And so they can start having conversations and being really supportive, because they all are fantasy writers, or they're all YA writers, or they're all YA fantasy writers. And it works nicely. So we're kind of pretty, I think we're pretty hands-on. So, I mean, students come, I get the sense that they come and they feel like they're just, going to be kind of anonymous, and we're not really interested in who they are as individuals. that is just not the case at all. We really encourage one-on-one contact. We try and develop a study program for each student, hear what they're interested in, help them make sure that they're kind of selecting their units in the best possible way.
We really want you to have a good experience.
Yeah, it's important
to us that you enjoy the program and enjoy what you're studying. So I think Jane and I are really passionate about the programs that we direct, and we're interested in keeping them up to date. We're interested that the units that you study reflect your interests as well as what's going on in the world at the moment. So, for instance, young adult fiction is one of my most popular units, and within Jane's program, there's also a writing young adult fiction unit, and they kind of, segue nicely into each other.
But, we don't only do that for the people who are not interested in young adult fiction. We have students working in creative writing in just adult fiction, creative non-fiction, memoir, poetry, all the principal genres of creative writing are represented. As you'd expect, most of the people coming in to do creative writing are interested in long form or short form narratives, so they're interested in short story writing or novel. But we also have a significant range of people working in poetry, and Marcel Freeman, who is a published poet, very esteemed in Australia, has teaching of that. Where are we up to with our talk?
The thing is, Jane,
now?
You know what I realised? I realised that we have questions pouring in.
Do we?
And that perhaps we should... Jane and I could talk forever about how much we enjoy directing our program and how enthused we are, but we might pop to the questions now, because then we can respond to the things that you've asked us. So I'm going to have a look at the first question. What are the similarities and differences between undergraduate and postgraduate creative writing, Jane? Okay,
so postgraduate units, there's a lot more independent work required of the students. I guess, it's a bit more hands-off than it is in undergraduate classroom. And, of course, people doing postgraduate study have finished their basic degree and they've decided to do this. So they tend to be quite motivated and self-directed, which is very enjoyable for us as teachers. They often have been out in the world for a while, though we do have a significant and kind of growing number of students moving straight from undergraduate study onto master's study, and I think that's probably a national trend, not just a trend with us at Macquarie. So you do have a much more diverse classroom, many different types of backgrounds of people, different ages, different regions, because we do a lot of distance teaching. So most of our students are online. They're from across Australia, outside of Sydney.
And overseas. I've got two from overseas at the moment.
Yeah. So Australians living overseas, studying with us online, that works really well. So I think probably the age range, diversity, they're very part-time. I'd say the vast majority. Though some people are doing full-time because they receive Austudy. Some people are eligible for Austudy to study full-time. So they would be the main differences. I think we've got some more questions as well.
We do, yep. We have a question now from Alana. If I finished a bachelor, would I be applying for a diploma or for a graduate diploma or a master's?
It could be either.
Yes. I should explain that the difference between the graduate diplomas and the master's degree, the subjects are generally the same, but you do less for a graduate diploma than for a master's degree, which also means that if you get to the end of your grad dip and decide, well, I may as well just do a few more subjects and get my master's degree, that is very possible.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
can make a seamless articulation into the master's program. So sometimes people say, well, I'm not quite sure if this is going to be for me, so I'll apply for the grad dip first, see what it's like, and then at the end, again, they can reevaluate and see if they want to move on.
Or you can do it the other way around. You can commence a master's, and if you decide to want to finish early, you can exit with a graduate diploma, as long as you've done the appropriate units.
Yeah, good question. Okay, we've got another question here.
From Bodhi.
Okay.
How does
a Master's of Creative Writing differ from a Master of Research with a creative thesis? That's quite good that Bodhi asked that, because one of the things that I was going to address was, is it possible to do a PhD after the Master of Creative Writing or the Master of Children's Literature? And
I'm just thinking, let's divide this answer into two components. One, that with the Masters you have more coursework.
Yes.
You have more options. And then secondly, the PhD pathway issue.
Yeah.
Okay, over to you.
So just to let you know, Macquarie, I'm going to be really quick. Macquarie introduced a new PhD training pathway in 2013 called the Master of Research. And that degree is a 2-year degree. It involves coursework and then a thesis in year 2. In terms of creative writing or children's literature, if you enrol in the Master of Research, you will not be able to do as much as you can in the dedicated Master of Children's Literature and Master of Creative Writing degrees.
So how many, if you're doing MRes, what's called MRes, year 1, how many units of study do you do in that year? About 8?
So you do 8.
And only 3 would be creative writing.
Yeah.
Whereas if you did the equivalent in the Masters, all 8 potentially could be creative writing.
Yeah. So if someone comes and says to me that they're undecided about whether they want to do Master of Research or Master of Children's Literature, and they're asking me because they're passionate about children's literature, I'd always advise them to do the Master of Children's Literature. So that's a short answer to a kind of a long and complex question.
It's a sort of, it's a great question, but it's one that would be worthwhile talking through on an individual basis, because it really helps to reflect on what it is you want to do in the long term. So, however, people are able to progress to a PhD through the Master's program. So we have what we describe as an alternative pathway to PhD. So if somebody commences in the Master's and then they think, actually, I'd also like to go on to a PhD, we have in both programs research preparation and research thesis units, where the student writes a 20,000 word thesis. This is a critical thesis that's then examined by 2 external examiners. So it meets the minimum requirement for a thesis for PhD entry. And in the Capstone unit, which we were talking about earlier, then that student who wants to go on to a PhD would certainly be doing the journal article for publication in referee journals, so that they show that they've got the capacity and are competitive with the highest ranking MRes students, ideally.
Yeah. So the summary answer to Bodhi's question is that it's quite complex, and that if you're interested in doing a PhD, you really need to come and talk to Jane and myself, and we'll be able to present you with a list of the best options for you.
Yes. Okay, move on to the next question.
Move on to the next question. The next question, this is one from Karen, and she asks, is there recognition of prior learning, for example, BA or being shortlisted for the Aspiring Writers Award by the Children's Book Council?
No. Well, no. And I'll explain why. Because you cannot get recognition of prior learning, which is RPL, for a degree of lesser status or lesser ranking. So if you've done a bachelor degree in a cognate area, so if you've done a bachelor degree and included creative writing, that's fantastic. That makes you a really ideal person for our program, but it won't give you recognition of prior learning because a BA is of a lesser level of education than a master's.
However, you can get RPL if you've got 3 or more years of teaching experience.
and other relevant professional experience. So we might have somebody who's been working in journalism or publishing or teaching English studies or something like that, and they can get RPL, or they might have a master's or a graduate diploma with some units that are relevant to our program, and certainly they get RPL for that. But so Karen, your background won't give you RPL, but it makes you an ideal applicant.
Okay.
Next question.
I'll have a look at the next question. Oh, I love this question. Are there exams at the end of the semester? Absolutely not.
No, there are no exams in any of our units.
No. Yeah. Okay. All right. The next question is from Judith, and she says, "I looked on the site and saw that creative writing CWPG 810 is only on in semester 1. Does that mean if I start the next semester, I wouldn't be able to take it?"
Right. Okay. Actually, this question is in 2 parts. So Creative Writing Seminar 1 is in Session 1. Creative Writing Seminar 2 is in Session 2. Most students commence in Session 1, i.e. at the beginning of each year, but we always have students commencing in Session 2 with Creative Writing Seminar 2, which is a different unit. There's different content, and there are no problems there at all. I tend to group those, if they're online, I tend to group them together so that they feel like, they're starting on the same foot.
And Judith's got a second part to her question where she says that she's already got an honours degree in media arts and have completed creative writing courses elsewhere. So would she be able to get RPL for that?
Well, again, no, because honours is not of equivalent value. I would probably look at that one individually and see whether the combination perhaps of the academic plus the professional experience might give you some RPL, but I'd really need to see information, see that in detail, and please do email me. I'm happy to discuss that further.
Okay, we have one question here. Is it advisable to couple a Master of Children's Literature with another master's degree, maybe in early childhood?
Well, I guess it would depend on what your career aims would be, and I should be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, I am very happy to talk about that. I think that so the question kind of has a couple of different nuances. I guess one of them is about career options. So what kind of career options are available to students after doing the Master of Children's Literature? And I must say that in terms of my current students, most of my students are teachers. So they're teachers who've come to develop more professional expertise. So, I think that being able to couple a Master of Children's Literature with a master's degree in education would definitely be a viable combination, particularly since my degree doesn't actually concentrate on teaching children's literature. What the Master of Children's Literature concentrates on is it looks at how children's literature, the kind of the ideological content of children's literature. So what we examine is how children's books seek to position children in various ways to the world, and we look at the kind of you must know that it's a degree in an English department. So we look at how different narrative techniques can be used to situate or manipulate readers into certain responses, and we have a very explicit focus on looking at how things like gender, race, and class are explored in children's books. So it's kind of got that cultural studies underpinning as well. So I think that it would work very well with a degree like a Master of Early Childhood because they've got quite different learning outcomes.
They're very different but very complementary. We've had a few students doing that kind of the double degree approach. So of course it's a huge commitment, but I'm just thinking that I've got a recent student who is doing international relations and creative writing because his novel that is still in progress is very much he needed that degree in international relations because it's about international relations issues. It's set in the Middle East. It's very political, and he wanted to be writing it from a really well-informed perspective. But then he also needed to immerse himself in the craft and technique of creative writing. So that's been interesting watching that work progress, and those two degrees were really complementary.
Very interesting. All right, we go to the next question. Can you do more credit points than the required amount for the degree? For example, the research units as well as the manuscript units.
Yes, we do have students doing that quite regularly. So, that would be something we're trying to plan for well ahead. And in fact, we're having a student graduate who did exactly that. So he used the research thesis units to write a critical thesis, and the manuscript unit in the creative writing program to write a creative manuscript. And then we've got
a question
from
Nico. Do you, Jane and Victoria, make the recognised prior learning decisions, or do we direct those questions to UAC? You actually
you direct them to us.
Yeah, and we make the decision about them.
Yeah. So RPL can either be granted right at the start of your application. In fact, it's a question that comes up in the application that we need to complete. Or if you've commenced your degree, you can then ask for RPL, and it's just a matter of finding the correct links on the website and having an email chat with us. And obviously we need to see verification in terms of past academic records or whatever it might be. But again, one-on-one email or conversation is all that it takes to initiate that. And there are guidelines, of course, for RPL that we absolutely need to follow. But
we're also very happy to grant it in situations where we feel.
Oh yeah.
So it's not something that only gets granted like once in a blue moon. We actually do it quite regularly.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, we've got another question here. If you've already written a novel but it isn't published, could we still use this in our tasks?
Good question. Now, this is a tricky one because we have quite a few students in the creative writing program who have work underway. And it's the university rule, nationally, not just at Macquarie, that all students must write new work for each unit. So what do we do when somebody is very passionate about an ongoing project? They have to then write new chapters, or sometimes what will happen is the student will show me the existing work and we will talk about what needs to be done, the amount of revising that would need to be done to regard it as new work. So this is not an environment where you could just submit work that you've already written and then get some feedback. Because as you can imagine, that would be tremendously unfair to other students who are writing work from scratch. And also it's regarded as self-plagiarism. So what I try to do is just get students to, obviously I see a lot of this work in the portfolio that is submitted, and we work it out on an individual basis. But I also really like to see students starting some, sometimes a person can get kind of a little bogged down in a project they've been working on for a long time. And what a lot of the creative writing units offer is an opportunity to start new work and to take new directions and to try new genres. Again, we try and talk this through on an individual basis.
I think that we have almost come to the end of our questions, but what I'm just clicking on here is the 2 links to last year's webinars, so that if you have any questions, any additional questions about the programs, you can have a look at those videos on YouTube, and hopefully they will provide answers.
And we're always happy to respond to emails.
Yes, so please email us. Now, we just wanted to thank all of you very, very much for attending the webinar tonight, and thanks for asking such intelligent questions. It was a pleasure to answer them. What you'll see on the screen right now is a survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to answer that for us.
Yes, we would. So, yeah, thank you, and we hope to meet you again via email or indeed in a class
soon.